"Don't touch that one." Ethan froze, his hand inches from the olive-green duffel. Mara stepped closer, her face suddenly pale. "That bag shouldn't be here." Bishop didn't bark, didn't move. He just sat beside it like he was guarding a grave. Ethan read the faded name stitched into the handle. S. Knox. The auction yard went silent. One man whispered, "Knox is dead." Ethan looked at the dog, then at the bag. Inside was no money, no gold. Just a recorder, a notebook, and one sentence that would pull a forgotten veteran back from silence. A man with no home should not have been buying forgotten luggage, and a dog with old soldier's eyes should not have been the first one to notice that one bag in the truck did not belong with the rest. But on a warm September afternoon in Live Oak Junction, Georgia, while thunder still mumbled somewhere beyond the pine line and rainwater steamed off the blacktop behind Palmetto Regional Airport, Ethan Hale stood beside a dented box truck with $1,000 gone from his pocket, and almost nothing left to his name. The men near the auction shed laughed softly, not cruel enough to sound guilty, not kind enough to stop. They leaned against pickup beds and folding tables, drinking gas station coffee, watching him the way people watch a man make a mistake they are grateful is not theirs. Ethan heard them. Of course he did. A veteran learns to hear what people do not say. He heard the small scrape of judgment beneath their jokes, the pause before someone called him buddy, the little drop in a voice when strangers realized he was sleeping in a van behind Millie's feed and grain. He kept his face still. That was something the service had left him, the ability to stand upright while the inside of him took weather. At 41, Ethan still carried himself with the bones of discipline, broad through the shoulders, lean from work that paid by the hour and never enough. His brown hair clipped short out of habit, his jaw shaded with 2 days of beard because razors cost less than dignity but still cost something. His denim shirt had been washed thin at the elbows, his boots had cracked along the sides. Yet there was a quiet steadiness in him that poverty had not managed to steal, a kind of worn-down grace, like an old flag folded carefully and placed in a drawer no one opened anymore. Beside him sat Bishop, an 8-year-old German shepherd with a black saddle, tan legs, and a gray muzzle that made him look older than he was. Bishop had the stillness of a church bell before it rings. He did not beg for attention. He did not bark at the auctioneers or sniff at the men eating boiled peanuts under the awning. He simply watched the truck. The vehicle had been backed into the lot by a tow driver who wanted no part of it after signing the release papers. Its white paint had gone chalky in the Georgia sun. A strip of blue lettering on the side had faded until only fragments remained. Regional Baggage Recovery. Inside, according to the manifest, were 73 pieces of unclaimed luggage from airports, bus depots, storage transfers, and one county evidence overflow that had been cleared months ago and sold legally, cleanly, coldly. Most people saw cracked suitcases, stale clothes, dead phone chargers, shoes with no pair, souvenirs nobody missed enough to claim. Ethan saw one chance, not a shining chance, not the kind men talk about in speeches, a small chance, the kind that fits in a cardboard box, the kind that might keep a man's van running through another month, might pay for a real shower, might put Bishop's medication back on schedule, without Ethan pretending he had already eaten. "You sure about this, Hale?" Mara Collins asked, clipboard tucked under one arm. She ran the auction lot with a voice like gravel and a heart she disguised under rules. Ethan looked at the truck doors. "No," he said. Mara studied him a moment, then nodded as if she respected the answer more than a lie. "All sales final. I know. No returns. I know that too." The men behind him chuckled. Someone said, "Hope there's gold in there." Another said, "Or at least a clean pair of pants." Ethan did not turn around. Bishop did. Just once, his amber eyes moved across the men without anger, without fear, almost with pity. Then he faced the truck again and rose. Ethan felt the shift before he fully saw it. The leash tightened, not hard, just enough to tell him something inside Bishop had changed. The dog's ears lifted, his body went straight and quiet, not excited, not curious, alert. Ethan's breath slowed, he knew that posture. Years ago, across hotter ground and under skies that had never looked friendly, Bishop had stood that way before finding things no human eye had caught. Not danger now, Ethan told himself. Not here. This was Georgia. This was an auction lot behind an airport with weeds growing through the fence and a vending machine humming beside the office door. This was not a mission. This was not the past reaching forward with a hand on his shoulder. Still, Bishop did not move. Rainwater dripped from the truck's rear bumper. Somewhere far off, a mourning dove called once and fell silent. Ethan stepped to the doors and placed his palm on the latch. The metal was warm from the day's heat, slick from the storm. For a moment he did not open it. He saw, reflected faintly in the dull handle, a man he sometimes failed to recognize. A man who had led teams through impossible nights, now gambling everything on other people's leftovers. Shame rose in him, quick and sour. Then Bishop nudged his knee gently, almost impatiently, as if to say that shame was a luxury they did not have time for. Ethan pulled the latch. The doors swung open with a tired groan, and the smell came out first. Damp canvas, dust leather, old perfume, sun-baked plastic, and the faint sweetness of forgotten things. Suitcases were stacked crookedly from floor to ceiling. Red ones, black ones, hard shells with airport stickers curling at the edges, duffel bags slumped like sleeping animals. A floral tote split open to reveal folded scarves, a guitar case with no guitar inside. Lives, Ethan thought before he could stop himself, not junk. Lives interrupted. Bishop stepped forward slow and certain. He ignored the bags nearest the edge. He ignored a torn backpack, a blue roller case, a cardboard box labeled kitchen in faded marker. He moved deeper into the truck until only the tip of his tail showed between the towers of luggage. Then he stopped. The whole lot seemed to hold its breath. Ethan climbed in after him, boots landing with a hollow thud on the metal floor. "What is it, boy?" Bishop lowered his head toward a shadowed corner where two oversized suitcases had collapsed over something smaller. He did not paw at it. He did not bark. He simply looked back at Ethan, and in that look there was no request, only certainty. Ethan pushed one suitcase aside, then another. Beneath them lay an old olive-green military duffel, sun-faded, scuffed at the seams, its zipper tied with a strip of paracord. On the handle, stitched in letters nearly worn away, was Canucks. Bishop let out a sound so low Ethan felt it more than heard it. Not a growl, not a whine. Recognition. Ethan stared at the bag, and the afternoon heat suddenly seemed to drain from the truck. Outside, the men were no longer laughing. Mara stood at the open doors, her clipboard lowered. Ethan reached toward the duffel, but stopped just before touching it. He did not know why his hand hesitated. Maybe because some objects do not wait to be opened. They wait to be answered. And as Bishop sat beside that old green bag like a guard beside a grave without a stone, Ethan Hale understood one thing with a clarity that made his chest tighten. He had not bought a truck full of lost luggage. He had bought his way into someone else's unfinished story. Before Ethan touched the old duffel, before the name S, Knox began to pull him toward a truth nobody had meant for him to find. He stood for one quiet second in the back of that truck and felt the weight of every eye behind him. He knew that kind of silence. It was the silence people offered when they had already decided what you were. To them, Ethan Hale was the man in the faded van, the one who parked behind Millie's Feed and Grain after closing, the one who shaved in gas station bathrooms when the manager looked the other way, the one who took odd jobs and never asked for more than the agreed amount. They saw the worn shirt, the tired boots, the brown paper bag of groceries tucked under his arm on Fridays. They did not see Coronado. They did not see the long gray mornings of training, the cold water, the shouted orders, the brotherhood built in exhaustion. They did not see the years when Ethan had moved with purpose so sharp it cut through fear, and Ethan, to his own surprise, had stopped trying to show them. There comes a season in a man's life when defending his dignity feels more tiring than losing it. He had come home 7 years earlier with a clean record, a stiff handshake, and a duffel of his own. For a while, he did what men like him were supposed to do. He worked security at a shipping yard outside Savannah. He rented a small room above a hardware store. He bought Bishop a new collar with a brass tag that caught the sun. He told himself that peace was just another kind of mission, one he would learn if he kept showing up. But peace had no briefing, no map, no commanding voice telling him where to place the pain. The shipping yard closed. The room got too expensive. Friends stopped calling because Ethan answered less and less. He did not fall all at once. Men rarely do. He slipped by inches, one unpaid bill, one missed appointment, one night in the van that was supposed to be temporary. One morning when temporary had become a life. Bishop was the only witness who never changed his opinion. In the service, Bishop had been trained to detect what people missed. A disturbed patch of earth, a strange scent in the air, the tiny shift in a room before danger arrived. But with Ethan, the dog detected other things. The way his hand shook slightly when fireworks cracked over town on the 4th of July. The way he went still when someone slammed a door. The way he sat awake in the van some nights with one palm resting on Bishop's back, not petting him, just reminding himself there was something warm and breathing beside him. Bishop never judged the van, never judged the empty wallet, never judged the silence Ethan carried like a second coat. That was why, when Bishop fixed his gaze on the olive green duffel, Ethan trusted him more than he trusted his own fear. He knelt slowly. The truck smelled of damp cloth and old miles. Outside, Mara cleared her throat but said nothing. Ethan ran his thumb over the stitched name. S. Knox. The letters were frayed, but they had survived. Something about that bothered him more than it should have. A name was not a valuable thing at an auction. It did not fetch money. It did not fix an engine or buy dinner. And yet, sitting there in the dim heat of that truck, Ethan felt as if the name had been waiting for someone who understood what it meant to be misplaced without being worthless. He looked at Bishop. "All right," he whispered. "Let's see who you found." The auction had begun that morning with the kind of ordinary noise that makes a desperate decision feel almost invisible. Pickup doors slammed. Folding chairs scraped over gravel. A woman in a sun visor argued over a pallet of dented microwaves. Two men from a thrift outlet inspected boxes of hotel lamps as if the future of civilization depended on finding the right shade. Ethan had arrived early, before the heat fully settled, with Bishop walking at his left knee and a folded envelope of cash tucked inside his shirt pocket. $1,000. 10 crisp hundreds he had earned one stubborn hour at a time. Repairing a sagging porch rail for a widow off County Road 16. Hauling feed sacks at Millie's, clearing storm branches from a church parking lot after a hard summer rain, changing a flat tire for a traveling nurse who insisted on paying him more than he asked. He had counted the money 3 times the night before under the dim dome light of his van, while Bishop slept with his muzzle on Ethan's boot. There had been something almost shameful about seeing his whole life reduced to 10 bills and a receipt from a gas station sandwich. But there had also been something clean about it. No credit, no favors, no pity. Just a man, his dog, and one last choice he could still call his own. The lot behind Palmetto Regional Airport was not much to look at. A chain-link fence leaned along the back edge, half swallowed by kudzu. Beyond it, small planes rose and fell against a pale Georgia sky, their engines humming like insects over the pine tops. The auction office sat in a beige trailer with a window unit rattling in one wall, and a hand-painted sign that read "All Sales Final" in red letters that had faded toward pink. Mara Collins stood on the trailer steps, calling out lot numbers through a microphone that popped every few sentences. She was brisk, sun-browned, and practical, the sort of woman who could tell the difference between a fool and a man with no better option. When the box truck came up, she did not dress it in romance. "Mixed unclaimed baggage," she announced. 73 pieces by count. Airport recovery, depot transfers, storage overflow. No guarantees on condition, no guarantees on contents. You buy the lot, you haul the lot. A few bidders glanced over, then away. Luggage was a gamble even for people who could afford bad luck. Sometimes there were electronics, watches, cameras, jewelry wrapped in socks. More often there were damp clothes, broken zippers, expired toiletries, paperback books with cracked spines, things that smelled like old rain and disappointment. Ethan knew all that. He had watched enough auction videos on the public library computer to understand the odds were poor. But odds had never been the same thing as certainty. If he could clean and resell even a quarter of it, he might make enough to repair the van's transmission before it failed completely. He might pay the overdue storage bill on the footlocker that held his service papers, his photographs, the last few pieces of a life that still had his name on it. He might buy Bishop's joint supplements without splitting the tablets in half to stretch them out. That was the part he did not let himself think about too long. Want can be managed. Need has teeth. The bidding started at 300. A reseller lifted 2 fingers. A man in a straw hat bid 4. Ethan waited, his face unreadable, though his pulse had begun to tap in his throat. At 600, the straw hat dropped out. At 8, the reseller frowned. At 9, Mara looked toward Ethan, not encouraging him, not warning him, just seeing him. Ethan felt the envelope against his chest like a small warm wound. 1,000, he said. His voice did not shake. That surprised him. The reseller laughed once under his breath and stepped back. Mara paused, scanned the lot, then struck the clipboard against her palm. Sold. $1,000 to Mr. Hale. For a second, nothing happened. Then the world seemed to return in pieces. Cicadas buzzing in the weeds, the distant whine of a landing plane. A bead of sweat sliding down Ethan's spine, Bishop shifting beside him with quiet attention. Mara handed over the paperwork at the trailer window. "You understand what you bought?" she asked, softer than before. Ethan signed his name. The pen was chained to the counter with a metal cord, and the chain clicked every time his hand moved. A truck full of things people forgot. Mara looked past him toward the lot, toward the men already smirking. Sometimes people forget because they don't care. Sometimes because life gets complicated. Ethan capped the pen. "I know something about complicated." She took the signed sheet and gave him the key. It was small, plain, and strangely heavy in his palm. When the tow driver rolled the truck to the side of the lot, the white panels flashed in the sun like old bone. Ethan stood in front of it and understood, fully and late, that he had just spent everything he had on a locked box of maybes. Behind him, someone muttered that hope was the most expensive junk in America. Ethan almost smiled at that. Maybe the man was right. Maybe hope was junk until somebody desperate enough picked it up, wiped off the dirt, and found a use for it. Then Bishop rose, not slowly this time, not casually. His ears sharpened, his body grew still, and his eyes fixed on the rear doors of the truck with the grave patience of a witness waiting to be called. Ethan felt the key bite into his palm. Whatever was inside, Bishop had already found it before the doors were open. Ethan stood at the open mouth of the truck, with the small key still pressed into his palm, though the doors were already unlocked and the heat inside had begun to breathe out around him. It was not the smell that held him there. He had known worse smells in worse places, and damp luggage was nothing compared to the long catalog of things a man learned to carry without naming. What stopped him was Bishop. The German shepherd had stepped into the truck with the care of someone entering a room where a prayer was still being said. His paws made soft, dull sounds on the ribbed metal floor. He did not sniff wildly. He did not nose through the nearest bags the way a normal dog might have. He passed a red suitcase with a cracked wheel, a navy roller bag wrapped in silver tape, a canvas tote spilling out vacation shirts printed with palm trees, and a black backpack tagged with a faded airline sticker. None of it mattered to him. Ethan climbed in after him, one hand braced against the doorframe. Behind him, the auction lot had gone oddly quiet. The men who had laughed earlier were still there, but their voices had fallen into little murmurs, as if Bishop's seriousness embarrassed them. Mara Collins stood a few feet away from the bumper, arms crossed, watching without interfering. She had seen buyers tear into lots before, seen them slice open bags with pocket knives and dump strangers' lives onto folding tables in search of resale value. But Ethan moved differently. He moved like every object might belong to someone who had meant to come back for it. Bishop continued forward until the passage narrowed. Suitcases leaned from both sides in a crooked wall, their handles tangled together, their luggage tags curled and blank from heat. Sunlight reached only a few feet into the truck, leaving the rear corners in a brown, dusty gloom. Bishop stopped there. His ears stood high, his tail lowered, not tucked, but held still with discipline. Ethan felt his own breath change. It was a small thing, but old training lived in small things. The angle of a dog's head, the absence of movement, the sudden shape silence takes when purpose enters it. "Bishop," Ethan said softly. The dog did not turn. He lowered his nose toward a cramped space beneath two oversized suitcases, one gray, one purple, both heavy enough to make Ethan grunt when he shoved them aside. Something waited under them, half hidden by a collapsed garment bag. At first, Ethan saw only a dull strip of green, then canvas, then a brass zipper darkened with age. He pulled the garment bag free, and the thing beneath it came loose with a soft scrape against the metal floor. An olive-green military duffel lay in the shadow, sun-faded and worn smooth at the corners, the kind of bag a man might drag through airports, barracks, motel rooms, and years he did not talk about. It was smaller than Ethan expected, and somehow heavier to look at than all the other luggage combined. Bishop sat beside it. That was what made the hair rise at the back of Ethan's neck. The dog did not paw it, did not nudge it, did not claim it. He sat the way he used to sit beside a marker, beside something found that required a human hand and a human decision. Ethan crouched, his knees cracked softly. The truck floor was warm through his jeans. He reached for the handle, then saw the name stitched along a strip of fabric near the seam. The letters were frayed, almost swallowed by dirt and time, but still there. S.K. Knox. Ethan stared at them until the rest of the truck seemed to blur. Names had a way of doing that. A name could make a stranger suddenly present. A name could turn junk back into evidence that somebody had stood somewhere, loved something, carried something, lost something. Ethan touched the stitching with his thumb. Bishop made a low sound in his chest, not warning, not fear, something closer to grief, remembered by a creature who had no words for it. "You know this smell?" Ethan whispered. Bishop's amber eyes lifted to him. Ethan did not know what answer he expected. He only knew that the look in Bishop's face was too steady to dismiss. Outside, Mara stepped closer. "Find something?" Ethan swallowed. His mouth had gone dry. "Maybe. One of the men behind her called military bag? Might be worth $20 if it ain't moldy." Ethan did not respond. The comment passed over him like wind over a closed door. He slid his fingers around the duffel's handle and tugged. It resisted at first, wedged against a metal ridge in the floor, then came free with a sudden shift of weight that pulled him forward. Something inside thudded softly. Not loose junk, not clothes alone. Organized weight, intentional weight. The paracord tied through the zipper had been knotted carefully, not to secure valuables from theft, but to keep the bag closed until the right hands found it. Ethan had tied knots like that. Men who lived out of duffels learned the language of cord, folds, and hidden order. He looked again at the name, S.K. Knox. Somewhere in the back of his mind the syllable stirred against memory, but would not come clear. A news clip maybe. A name read once in a veteran's office, a voice at a diner saying something about a man from the coast who never came home right. Ethan pulled the duffel toward the light. Dust rose in a thin golden veil. Bishop stood and moved with it, shoulder nearly touching Ethan's arm, as if whatever belonged to the bag now belonged to both of them. At the truck doors, Mara's expression had changed. The practical hardness had left her face, replaced by something quieter, respect maybe, or worry. Ethan set the duffel down near the edge where sunlight fell across the stitched name. The whole lot seemed ordinary again for a second. Weeds at the fence, planes humming overhead, men waiting to be entertained. But Ethan knew better. He had felt ordinary moments turn before. A door opens, a dog stops, a name appears where no name should matter. And suddenly a man's life is no longer moving in the direction it was a minute ago. Ethan rested one hand on Bishop's head, feeling the old dog's warmth beneath his palm. "All right," he said, barely above a breath. "Let's find out who Mr. Knox was." Ethan carried the olive-green duffel out of the truck and set it on a folding table beneath the auction shed. Not because the bag was heavy, though it was, but because something about opening it on the truck floor felt wrong, almost careless. Some things deserved light. Some things deserved a surface cleared of dust and noise. Mara seemed to understand without being asked. She swept aside a stack of old invoices, then stepped back. The men who had joked earlier drifted closer, curiosity doing what kindness had not. Ethan ignored them. Bishop stood beside the table, shoulder pressed lightly against Ethan's leg, his eyes fixed on the paracord knot tied through the zipper. The knot was clean, deliberate, the kind made by hands that valued order even when life did not offer much of it. Ethan worked it loose slowly. His fingers remembered knots better than they remembered peace. When the cord finally slid free, the zipper gave with a dry metallic rasp, and the duffel opened like a held breath being released. There was no treasure inside, no bundle of cash, no gold watch, no miracle that would repair Ethan's van or pay the storage bill or make the men behind him admit they had been wrong. At first glance, it was only a small collection of ordinary things, packed with a care that made them anything but ordinary. A brass compass wrapped in a faded handkerchief. A waterproof notebook, its corners softened from use, a service coin sealed in a plastic sleeve. A small digital recorder with a cracked screen, 2 neatly folded shirts, a worn leather wallet with no money inside, and an envelope, cream-colored, thick and untouched by mold as if someone had protected it from every mile it had traveled. On the front, written in steady block letters, were the words, "For whoever still believes names matter." Ethan read the line once, then again. The auction lot seemed to fall away from him. Names matter, not ranks, not rumors, not the tired labels people pin on a man when they do not want to hear the whole story. Names. Bishop nudged the notebook with his nose, then sat back as though he had done his part. Ethan opened it. The first page carried a name in blue ink. Samuel Knox, U.S. Navy, Communications Specialist, retired 2021. Beneath that was an address in a coastal town Ethan had never visited, and a line written smaller than the rest. If this reaches someone honest, do not sell it by the pound. Mara, standing near his shoulder, whispered, "My lord." Ethan turned the pages. They were filled with dates, initials, baggage tag numbers, storage locations, and short notes that looked almost like inventory at first. But then he read more closely. A red suitcase with a silver ribbon belongs to a retired nurse, likely sentimental photographs inside. Blue sea bag, initials RT, owner last seen at Veterans Outreach Office. Brown leather case, contains union pins, possibly family keepsakes. The list went on, each item described not by market value but by meaning. Samuel Knox had not been collecting luggage. He had been trying to return pieces of people's lives. Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. Not pain exactly. Recognition. He knew what it was to have your belongings reduced to clutter by people who did not know what each object had survived. He thought of the footlocker in storage, the one he was close to losing. To anyone else it held papers, old photographs, a uniform jacket he no longer wore. To Ethan it held proof that he had once belonged somewhere. The recorder lay cold in his palm when he picked it up. Its battery indicator blinked faintly, impossible and stubborn. He pressed play. Static breathed through the tiny speaker. Then a man's voice emerged, low, worn, southern at the edges. "My name is Samuel Knox. If you're hearing this, then one of two things happened. Either I was wrong about people forgetting, or somebody finally looked past the dust." No one moved. Even the men near the shed stopped shifting their boots. The voice continued, calm but tired. "I spent 3 years tracing lost bags nobody thought mattered. Not because of what was in them, but because of who they belonged to. Folks disappear in plain sight every day. Veterans, widows, drivers, workers passing through towns that never learn their names. A lost bag may be the last thing that proves they were here." Ethan lowered his head. Bishop's breathing was steady beside him. Samuel's voice crackled again. "There's a cabinet at Old Cypress Freight Depot, unit office. Combination is in the notebook. If you found Bishop's kind of courage in whatever dog brought you here, trust it. Dogs don't care what a man looks like when the world is done with him. They remember who he is." Ethan's hand tightened around the recorder. Mara looked at Bishop, then at Ethan, her eyes softer now. The final words came through barely above the static. "A man is not lost just because nobody comes looking." The recorder clicked off. For a long moment, the only sound was the airport wind moving through the chain-link fence. Ethan stared at the open duffel, at the envelope, the notebook, the compass, the small, careful order of a life unfinished. He had spent $1,000 hoping to find something worth selling. Instead, Bishop had found something worth honoring. Ethan did not drive to Old Cypress Freight Depot right away. A younger version of him might have. The younger man would have heard the voice on the recorder, seen the coordinates in the notebook, and treated the next step like an order. But the man standing beneath the auction shed in Live Oak Junction was older in ways that had nothing to do with birthdays. He knew that some doors should not be opened while strangers leaned in, hoping for a spectacle. So he packed Samuel Knox's things back into the duffel with the same care he would have given a folded flag, thanked Mara with a nod, and spent the rest of the afternoon moving the 73 pieces of luggage into the back of his van, and the rented storage corner she quietly let him use behind the office. She did not call it charity. Ethan was grateful for that. By dusk, the lot had emptied, the sky had gone the color of old peach skin, and Bishop lay beside the duffel with his chin on his paws, refusing to sleep. Ethan sat on the van's rear bumper and opened Samuel's notebook again. The more he read, the less Samuel looked like the man people had probably decided he was. The handwriting was disciplined but human, tight on some pages, looser on others, as if fatigue had leaned over his shoulder. There were phone numbers crossed out, address changes, notes about shelters, union halls, truck stops, senior housing offices, veteran centers, and church basements that served coffee on Tuesdays. Samuel had followed forgotten bags the way another man might follow case files. not because anyone paid him, but because he could not accept that a life became unimportant the moment paperwork got inconvenient. On one page, Ethan found a newspaper clipping folded into quarters. The headline was short and cold: "Retired Navy Specialist Missing After Coastal Training Incident." The article described Samuel Knox as 44, recently separated from service, known to be struggling with readjustment, last seen near the marsh roads outside Darien, Georgia, in May of 2021. The words were neat, public, and useless. Struggling with readjustment. Ethan stared at that phrase until the letters blurred. He hated how clean it sounded. People used phrases like that when they wanted grief to behave itself, when they wanted a man's pain to fit inside a column and leave room for advertisements. Bishop lifted his head, sensing the change in him. Ethan ran a hand over the dog's ears. "They did it to him too," he said. His voice surprised him with its softness. Beneath the clipping was a photograph. Samuel Knox stood outside a warehouse beside a woman with silver-brown hair and a smile that seemed to know both pride and worry. He was not tall, not broad, not the kind of man strangers would pick out as heroic. He had careful eyes, a trimmed beard, and one hand resting on a stack of tagged suitcases as if each one had a pulse. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Sam and Margaret, first month of the Return Project." Ethan turned the picture over again. The Return Project. So it had a name before the world let it die. He kept reading. Samuel had worked communications in the Navy, the notebook revealed, and after retirement he volunteered at a regional baggage recovery warehouse. At first his job had been simple: sort, log, label, dispose. But Samuel began noticing patterns no one else cared to notice. The same names appearing in outreach records. The same bags transferred from depot to depot. Personal items belonging to people who had moved, lost housing, lost contact, lost the ability to chase a claim number through a phone system that treated patients like currency. He started making calls after hours. He wrote letters. He drove 2 counties over to return a toolbox to a retired mechanic because the man's initials were carved into the handle. He spent 3 weeks tracing a garment bag because a wedding photograph had been tucked inside the lining. None of it made him money. None of it made him important. It simply made him unable to look away. Then came the misunderstanding. A supervisor found Samuel working late, with files spread across the break room table, and assumed obsession where there had been devotion. A local reporter turned his disappearance into a cautionary paragraph about veterans who could not let go of the past. Even some who knew him accepted the easier story because the truth required more effort. Ethan closed the notebook and looked across the darkening lot. For years, he had thought being forgotten was the worst thing that could happen to a man. Now he wondered if being misunderstood was worse. Forgotten people could still be found. Misunderstood people had to be believed first. Bishop stood, stretched, and placed one paw gently on the duffel. Ethan looked down at the stitched name again. Samuel Knox had not lost himself. He had been carrying too many other people's names for a world too hurried to read them. Ethan waited until the last of the daylight had thinned into a copper haze before he started the van. He told himself he was being careful, that a man did not drive out to an abandoned freight depot on the edge of town just because a voice on a cracked recorder asked him to. But the truth sat beside him in the passenger seat, packed inside Samuel Knox's duffel, quiet as a church secret. Bishop stood behind the seats, with his front paws braced between them, nose lifted toward the open window, reading the evening air in ways Ethan had long ago stopped questioning. Live Oak Junction slipped past in pieces. The closed barber shop with the striped pole that no longer spun. The diner where the same 3 retirees drank coffee every afternoon. The brick Veterans Hall, with its flag hanging still in the damp air. The pawn shop window full of guitars waiting for hands that might never return. Ethan drove slowly, not because the van could not go faster, though it complained at every hill, but because each mile felt like a line he was crossing without permission. Old Cypress Freight Depot sat 12 miles south of town, beyond the pecan orchards and the low fields where rainwater gathered in silver sheets after storms. Once it had been a busy transfer point, back when freight trains still carried furniture, tools, uniforms, letters, and small-town departures through Georgia with a kind of ordinary dignity. Now the tracks were rusted. The loading platforms sagged. Vines climbed the brick walls like time trying to cover its own handwriting. Ethan parked near a leaning sign that read Cypress Freight in white letters ghosted by sun and rain. The engine ticked as it cooled. Cicadas pulsed from the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded, so faint it might have been memory. "We look, we leave," Ethan said. Bishop glanced at him, unconvinced. The dog jumped down carefully when Ethan opened the side door, his joints stiff for the first few steps, then steadying as purpose found his body. Ethan took Samuel's notebook, the small flashlight from his glove box, and the brass compass without knowing why. The depot smelled of wet earth, warm brick, and old wood. Every sound seemed larger than it was. The crunch of gravel under Ethan's boots, the soft click of Bishop's nails, the whisper of weeds brushing against the loading dock. There was no danger in the place, not exactly. No threat waiting in the dark. Only abandonment, and sometimes abandonment could feel like a room full of people who had all decided not to speak. Bishop led him along the side of the building, past boarded windows and a rusted scale, toward a small office tucked beneath the overhang. The door hung crooked but closed. On it, someone had once painted "Civic Office" in black letters. Ethan tried the knob. Locked. He checked the notebook again. Samuel had written "office cabinet," combination in margin. Trust sequence, not date. Ethan frowned, flipping pages until he noticed numbers beside several entries, always circled, always near returned names. 4-12-7-21, not a date, a sequence. He found a rusted key box near the door with 4 small dials stiff from age. Bishop sat beside him, watching the road behind them, calm but alert. Ethan turned the numbers one by one. 4. 12 was not possible, so 1 and 2. 7, 2 and 1. The box clicked open. Inside lay a brass key on a tag labeled "Office," and beneath it a folded note so brittle he opened it like a man handling dry leaves. The handwriting was Samuel's. "If you came this far, you already know the difference between curiosity and responsibility." Ethan stood very still. The sentence reached him in a place he had been trying to keep sealed. Curiosity could walk away. Responsibility could not. He unlocked the office door. The room inside was small, airless, and thick with dust. His flashlight crossed a desk, a calendar from 2021, a cracked coffee mug, maps pinned to corkboard, and against the far wall a gray metal cabinet with 3 drawers. Bishop went to it immediately and sat. Ethan almost laughed, though nothing about the moment was funny. "You and Samuel would have gotten along," he murmured. The top drawer opened with a shriek of metal. Inside were folders, each labeled by name, not number. No treasure. No scandalous secret. No hidden fortune waiting to rescue Ethan from himself. Just names, dozens of them, carefully written, carefully preserved. Ethan touched the first folder with 2 fingers, and a strange humility came over him. He had thought he was following a mystery. Instead, he had walked into a room where one forgotten man had tried to remember everybody else. Bishop leaned gently against his knee, and in that quiet, ruined office, Ethan understood the task had just become his. The cabinet did not look like anything that could change a man's life. It was dented along one side, gray paint chipped down to bare metal, with a strip of masking tape on the top drawer where Samuel Knox had written "Return Files" in black marker. Ethan had seen cabinets like it in government offices, storage rooms, county buildings, places where paper went to be forgotten politely. But when he opened the second drawer and saw the folders arranged by last name, each tab written in the same careful hand, he felt a quiet pressure settle over him. This was not clutter. This was a congregation. Bishop stood close enough that Ethan could feel the dog's breath against his wrist. The room was warm, stale, and dim except for the flashlight beam moving slowly over Samuel's work. Folder after folder held photographs of luggage, baggage claim slips, handwritten notes, phone numbers, addresses crossed out and rewritten, small biographies pieced together from scraps. There was a hard-shell suitcase belonging to a retired railroad worker in Macon. Inside it, a stack of service pins and a wool cap his wife had knitted before she passed. There was a blue duffel traced to a long-haul truck driver who had lost it during a transfer in Jacksonville. The contents mostly clean shirts, but tucked in the side pocket was a letter from his brother that he had carried for 12 years. There was a leather briefcase with union cards, old pay stubs, and a photograph of 4 men standing beside a bridge project in 1989, all of them smiling as if the day had promised to last. Samuel had written beneath that one, "Not valuable to market, valuable to memory." Ethan read the sentence twice. It landed somewhere deep and tender, where he kept things he did not examine often. His own life, lately, had been measured by usefulness. Could he lift? Could he repair? Could he show up early and leave without complaint? If not, people looked through him. Samuel's files insisted on another measure. A person was not the sum of what he could sell, produce, or prove. A person was the stories he carried, the names he answered to, the hands that once packed his bag with care. Ethan moved to the bottom drawer. It stuck halfway and he had to pull gently, afraid of damaging the contents. Inside was a separate group of folders tied with cotton string. On top was a photograph of Samuel Knox and Margaret Knox standing in front of this very depot when it still had windows. Margaret's hair was caught by the wind, and Samuel was laughing at something outside the frame. He looked alive in the simplest possible way, not heroic, not tragic, just present. Behind the photo was an envelope addressed to Margaret in Bellwater, South Carolina. Ethan did not open it. His thumb rested on the sealed flap, and he felt the boundary there. Some truths are found by strangers, but they do not belong to strangers. Beneath the envelope was Samuel's final log. The last page was dated August 19, 2021. "My fear is not that I will be forgotten," he had written. "My fear is that the work will be mistaken for madness, because it asked people to slow down." Ethan lowered himself into the wooden chair by the desk. It creaked under him. Outside, cicadas sang in the darkening weeds, a steady electric chorus. Bishop rested his head on Ethan's knee, not asking, only anchoring him. For years, Ethan had believed his problem was that the world had stopped seeing him. Now, sitting in Samuel's hidden archive, he understood a harder truth. He had stopped seeing others too. Not because he was cruel, because survival narrows the eyes. It makes a man count dollars before names, exits before faces, risk before meaning. Samuel Knox, misunderstood and nearly erased, had done the opposite. He had widened his gaze when life gave him every reason to shrink it. Ethan gathered the folders carefully. Not all of them, only the ones marked urgent and the one addressed to Margaret. He closed the cabinet, then placed his palm against it for a moment, as if thanking the metal for holding what people would not. "We'll do it right," he whispered. Bishop's ears lifted at the sound of his voice. Not fast, not loud, right. And in the small, ruined office of Old Cypress Freight Depot, surrounded by names that had waited too long, Ethan Hale felt the first clean edge of purpose return to him. Bellwater, South Carolina, was the kind of town people passed through gently, as if afraid to wake it. Live oaks leaned over the streets with long gray moss hanging from their limbs, and the houses sat back from the road behind azaleas, porch swings, and mailboxes with hand-painted numbers. Ethan arrived just after noon, the van ticking and coughing as it rolled past a white chapel, a feed store, and a small diner with blue curtains in the windows. Bishop sat upright beside him, his muzzle lifted to the warm air slipping through the cracked window. The folder addressed to Margaret Knox lay on the passenger seat between them, along with Samuel's sealed envelope, the brass compass, and the old olive-green duffel. Ethan had driven 3 hours with one thought circling him like a bird that could not find a branch. Some news is not heavy because it is bad, but because it has waited too long to be given. Margaret lived at the end of Heron Lane in a pale yellow house with a tin roof and 2 rocking chairs on the porch. The yard was tidy, not decorative, the kind kept by someone who still needed order because life had once taken too much without asking. Wind chimes hung near the door, barely moving. Ethan parked by the curb and did not get out right away. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. They had done difficult things, fixed engines, lifted lumber, carried men through grief without knowing what to say. But now they trembled at the thought of knocking on one woman's door. Bishop touched his nose to Ethan's sleeve. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. "I know." He carried the duffel carefully, not like evidence, not like a delivery, but like something borrowed from the dead and owed to the living. Margaret opened the door before he could knock twice. She was 48, perhaps, with silver-brown hair tied loosely at the back of her neck, and eyes that had learned to be cautious without becoming cold. She looked at Ethan first, then at the bag, then at Bishop. Whatever greeting she had prepared disappeared from her face. Her hand moved to the doorframe. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Ethan removed his cap. "Mom, my name is Ethan Hale. I found it in an unclaimed baggage lot in Georgia." Her expression closed, not harshly, but like a window against sudden rain. "People have come before. I'm not here to sell you anything." They always say something like that. Ethan accepted the words because they were fair. He set the duffel gently on the porch boards and stepped back. I think this belonged to Samuel Knox. Margaret's breath changed. It was small, almost invisible, but Bishop heard it. The dog sat down at the edge of the porch, still and respectful. Margaret looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face softened against her will. Sam loved shepherds, she said, so quietly Ethan nearly missed it. Said they remembered better than people. Ethan reached into the folder and took out the photograph from Old Cypress Freight Depot. He handed it to her without touching her hand. She looked down. The years seemed to leave her and return all at once. Her thumb moved over Samuel's face in the picture. They said he was confused, she whispered. They said he wandered off chasing things that didn't matter. Ethan swallowed. He was chasing names. Margaret looked up. He opened the notebook to the pages of Samuel's return files, then showed her the envelope, still sealed, still addressed in Samuel's handwriting. Margaret did not take it immediately. She stared at it as if paper could be both mercy and wound. I waited for a letter, she said. For months, I kept thinking there'd be one more explanation, one more sentence, something. Ethan's voice stayed low. There is. He offered her the recorder next. Her fingers shook when she pressed play. Static came first, then Samuel's voice filled the porch, worn and steady, carrying across the wind chimes in the quiet yard. Margaret, if this reaches you, then somebody kinder than the system found the trail. I need you to know I did not leave because I forgot my way home. I stayed because every file had a name, and every name had someone who might still be waiting. Maybe that sounds foolish. Maybe it was. But you taught me that people are not disposable just because the world gets busy. Margaret covered her mouth, but she did not cry loudly. Her grief was deeper than sound. The recording continued. I was tired, Maggie, but I was not lost, not from you. Never from you. When the message ended, no one moved. A truck passed somewhere beyond the trees. Bishop lowered his head to his paws. Margaret held the recorder against her chest, then looked at the duffel. They told me he lost himself, she said, but he was trying to find everyone else. Ethan felt the sentence settle into him like a truth he had been waiting to hear for his own sake, too. Margaret finally opened the envelope. He turned away to give her privacy, looking out toward the live oaks and the bright, ordinary afternoon. After a while, she spoke behind him. Mr. Hale, yes, Mom. Don't let his work end in a cabinet. Ethan looked down at Bishop, whose amber eyes were already on him, patient and certain. No, Mom, he said. I don't think we can. Ethan left Bellwater with Samuel Knox's notebook on the passenger seat, and Margaret's words following him all the way back into Georgia. Don't let his work end in a cabinet. The sentence did not shout, it did not command, it simply stayed, the way certain truths stay when a man has spent too long pretending he cannot hear them. By the time Live Oak Junction appeared beyond the windshield, evening had softened the fields into gold, and Bishop slept with his head against the door, worn out from the journey but peaceful, in a way Ethan had not seen in months. The van still rattled. The fuel gauge still leaned too close to empty. Ethan still had no house waiting for him, no steady paycheck, no miracle folded inside his pocket. And yet something had shifted. Not outside him, inside. The next morning, he returned to the auction lot before Mara had finished unlocking the office. She found him behind the shed with the truck doors open, luggage arranged in careful rows across two folding tables. Each bag had a note card beside it. Color, brand, tag number, possible owner, personal details, if any could be found without disrespect. Ethan had not slept much, but his eyes were clearer than they had been the day she sold him the lot. You selling all this? Mara asked. Ethan looked down at a cracked brown suitcase with a barber's smock folded neatly inside. Some of it, maybe, if it's truly untraceable. He placed a hand on Samuel's notebook, but not before we try. Mara studied him for a long moment, then walked into the office and came back with a box of blank labels, 2 pens, and an old laptop that wheezed when she opened it. She set them on the table without ceremony. Wi-Fi password is on the fridge, she said. Don't make me regret it. Ethan almost smiled. Yes, Mom. That was how the last bag project began. Not with a grant or a speech or a ribbon cutting, but with a homeless veteran, a retired German shepherd, a borrowed laptop, and a row of forgotten luggage beneath a hot Georgia sky. At first, people came because they were curious. Men who had laughed at Ethan now lingered near the tables, hands in pockets, suddenly careful with their jokes. A mechanic from the north side helped fix a broken suitcase wheel. A church secretary offered to print flyers. A retired postal worker recognized an address format on an old baggage tag and spent an hour helping Ethan narrow down a name. Mara called a friend at the airport records office. Nobody called it kindness out loud. They just kept showing up. That suited Ethan fine. Kindness, he was learning, did not always arrive wearing soft clothes. Sometimes it came with a roll of packing tape, a cup of bad coffee, and someone saying, "Move over, let me see that label." Days passed. Then weeks. The first returned item was a blue duffel belonging to a traveling hospice nurse who had lost it during a transfer 2 years earlier. Inside was a recipe book written in her mother's hand. When she came to claim it, she held the book to her chest and stood very still, as if afraid gratitude might break something open. The second was a leather tool pouch returned to a retired bridge inspector in Macon. The third was a garment bag with a photograph sewn into the lining. Every return taught Ethan the same lesson in a different language. People do not only lose things. Sometimes they lose proof that parts of their lives mattered. By late October, the last bag project had a small sign painted on plywood and nailed beside Mara's auction shed. Bishop's paw print was stamped in black paint beneath the words. Ethan still slept in the van, but now it was parked with permission, near the shed, under a security light that hummed at night like a tired guardian. He still carried pain. Purpose did not erase that. It simply gave the pain somewhere useful to stand. One morning, Ethan loaded a repaired gray suitcase into the passenger seat for delivery to an old Union Hall outside Savannah. The sun came through the live oaks in long, warm ribbons. Bishop climbed in slowly, settled beside the seat, and leaned his graying muzzle against Ethan's shoulder. Ethan looked at the road ahead, then at the painted sign in the rearview mirror. A truck of abandoned luggage had not made him rich. It had not given him back the exact life he lost, but it had given him work that honored what the world overlooked. It had given Samuel Knox a voice, Margaret an answer, and Ethan a way to stand among people again without lowering his eyes. He started the engine. The van coughed, then caught. "Looks like we still have work to do," Ethan said. Bishop gave one soft huff, almost a laugh, and the two of them pulled onto the Georgia road, carrying one more forgotten name toward home. If this story reminded you that no one deserves to be forgotten, take a second to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, which moment touched you most, and where are you watching from tonight?